Hey guys, welcome back to Annie Narrates. Here we review stories that beautiful people like yourselves post on the internet. Today's story's title goes like this. Son cut ties with me 10 years ago to live with his mother and her AP, but suddenly wants to reconnect with me after he has a baby. It doesn't make sense until I meet his girlfriend, and oh boy. I, 51 male, have a 25-year-old son who cut me out of his life 10 years ago, when he was 15, because he wanted to live with his mother. His mother, my ex-wife, had been cheating on me with a common friend of ours, and during the custody battle, our son chose his mother over me for some reason. My guess at the time was that his mother had probably been trying to turn him against me and had succeeded. I thought of suing her for it, but decided against it because at the end of the day, my son was nearing 16 and could think for himself, so it must not have been that easy to manipulate him. After spending the first 15 years of his life with me, if he still didn't think of me as a good father, then maybe I wasn't that great. So, unfortunately, even though I had never been any of those things, they somehow succeeded in making me out to be an absent, selfish, and neglectful father who couldn't care less about his son. My ex-wife got full custody of our son while I did have visitation rights. My son made it very clear to me afterward that he no longer wanted me to be a part of his life and was happier living with just his mother and her new boyfriend. I also believe that her boyfriend's bank balance also had a lot to do with their sudden change in loyalty. My friend, who my ex-wife had an affair with and is currently married to, was the owner of a moderately successful restaurant chain and was reasonably rich. I was working in sales at the time of my divorce and had a satisfactory income, but evidently it wasn't satisfying enough for my ex-wife and son. I got out of paying alimony because of their cheating, and since they went completely no contact with me after the divorce, my wife didn't require me to pay child support either. I managed to save a considerable amount of money after the first couple of years, and 2 years ago, I started my own business. It's been doing great, and I would say that I'm close to the same wealth bracket that my ex-wife's husband is. Not there yet, but close. All of us used to be a part of the same friend circle since we knew one another from our college days, so I get to hear about how they're doing from other friends too occasionally, until they remember they're around me and switch topics. I know that my son had recently tried to sue his mother and her husband over something, but I didn't know what exactly, and it felt awkward to ask, so I didn't. He'd also had a baby apparently, and I felt really bad that I wouldn't be able to meet my grandson, but again, I didn't say anything about it. Then I also found out that my ex-wife and her husband have been fighting and are really unhappy in their marriage at the moment, but again, didn't find out what they've been fighting about. So I was aware that there was trouble in paradise, but didn't know what exactly was going on, and didn't bother to find out either, because it didn't affect my life, so there was no need for me to give a damn. Then, 5 days back, my son reached out to me on Facebook and said that he wanted to make things right. He'd sent me a long apology letter and said that he'd been brainwashed by his mother, that he still missed me and had a really tough time with his mother and her husband, and wanted to make amends with his own father now that he was a father too and could understand my position. I didn't think there was anything weird about it at the time and agreed to forgive him and was ready to meet with him and his girlfriend, and of course, my grandson. I was a little excited that so many things were going wrong with my ex-wife's life because that made me feel like justice had been served, and in that excitement, I didn't think there was anything weird about my son wanting to reconnect only after he tried to sue his mother and stepdad and then failed. So I met him at a restaurant 3 days ago, and only when I met his girlfriend did I realize how messed up this situation was. His girlfriend and the mother of my grandson's child was actually my ex-wife's husband's niece. She was just 21 and had just graduated, but couldn't land a job because her uncle, my ex-wife's husband, had refused to help them out with the baby. Her mother had passed away a few months after her birth, and her father had never been in the picture at all. So she lived with her grandparents, her maternal ones, and had been raised by them, while her uncle funded her education and paid for everything that she needed. I'd heard a lot about her and had seen enough of her pictures from her childhood into adolescence while I was still friends with her uncle to be able to recognize her. It was easier because her face hadn't changed much, but she just looked a lot more depressed and sleep deprived now. She and my son had met each other a couple of times during the holidays and stuff, but had started dating only 2 years ago, and back then, their families had been okay with it, even though my son was 23 and she was just 19. Earlier this year, when she got pregnant, she had to keep it all under the wraps and even moved in with my son and claimed that she couldn't come back from college because she'd started showing. They'd somehow kept the whole pregnancy a secret, but once the baby was born, there was no hiding it anymore, and they had to tell people. My ex-wife wasn't happy, but it was nothing compared to her husband's anger. I knew from back when we used to be friends that he considered his niece to be nothing short of his own daughter, and he didn't want her to turn out like his sister, who got pregnant with some random guy who wasn't even there for her, and then became heavily dependent on her brother because she wasn't emotionally capable of anything. So when he found out about the baby, he was furious and said that they could either put the baby up for adoption or he would stop funding them. And that's exactly what happened when she refused to give up her baby. He cut off her funds and stopped paying my son's bills as well. My son was just starting out work and wasn't earning enough to support the lifestyle he used to, and didn't want to cut corners, especially now that he had a baby to think of. So he'd come to me to ask for help and expected me to take them all in. And his girlfriend had just graduated a couple of months ago, but with a pregnancy, she couldn't just start working, and she didn't have any experience either. This was why my ex-wife had been fighting with her husband, because she wanted him to forgive them, but he didn't think that it was necessary. This was also why my son had tried to sue his mother and stepdad, because they'd suddenly cut off all their funds, but they didn't have a case at all because they weren't exactly owed that amount, and they were adults now, so they could take care of themselves. But clearly they did not believe that and still wanted other people to look out for them and clean up their messes. Now that my son realized that his stepdad wasn't going to be there for him, he'd suddenly started to feel apologetic for his past behavior and now wanted me to take over the role of his father. Once I'd heard him out of the restaurant and realized what was going on, I started feeling a lot less inclined to forgive him and have a fresh start because this was just him looking for a way out of all his problems. He wasn't really sorry for anything and was still behaving in the same greedy and self-involved way instead of genuinely feeling any regret or remorse for what he'd done to me all those years ago. For 7 years, it didn't even occur to him that what he'd done to me was not cool. But now that he had nowhere else to go, he felt sorry about the past all of a sudden. It was too convenient and I could see right through it, so I decided that I wasn't going to help him. It was also very hard for me to feel sorry for my son now that he was a grown man with a son of his own. He'd grown a beard and stuff and looked a lot more aged than the tiny, scrawny 15-year-old boy that I remembered. It's much harder to see him as helpless because he isn't really helpless. He's just spoiled and selfish and unwilling to work hard under any circumstances. So I told him that I won't be able to help him and stood up to leave. He looked stunned at my refusal, and after a few seconds, he said that I was his dad and I was supposed to look out for him when he was in trouble and not turn my back on him just because of some stupid grudges. So I told him that I'd stop being his father the day he chose his mother and his stepdad over me. He very easily turned his back on me and lied about what kind of father I was, just because he wanted to enjoy a rich kid's lifestyle, so now he could stick to that and face the consequences on his own. He'd accused me of being an absent father all those years back, and now I was just behaving according to what he'd already believed. My son tried to argue with me some more and said that I'd forgiven him a couple of days back when he reached out to me online, but now, just because he was asking me for help, I was acting this way. I even made it clear to him that, at the time, I had agreed to meet him only because I believed that he was apologizing to me because he was genuinely sorry for what he'd done. But now, it was clear to me that he'd only contacted me because his stepdad had cut him off, and he had nobody else to turn to. And I was not about to let myself be treated as a last resort because there's no respect in that, and he's not about to walk over me and use me after what he did in the past. I was just about to walk away after that, but this time, it was his girlfriend who stopped me and said that I should be the bigger person and at least think about my grandson before I turn my back on them. She also mentioned how I had never signed away my rights, so technically, no matter what I said, my son was still my own, and I owed it to him to help him out in these times. That didn't even make sense because that applies to custody of minors, and as far as I knew, my son was way past the cutoff age for being a minor and was fully capable of taking care of himself. I was getting really frustrated by their constant whining, so I decided to let it all out once and for all. I told them both that they were adults and had made these decisions themselves, so they couldn't just sit around and complain about how unfair everyone was being to them when they'd known what the consequences of their actions would be right from the beginning. They could both get jobs and get friends to help them out with the baby, or they could try to live a simpler life, but it wasn't as though it was impossible to live on my son's salary range. He's working in marketing at a firm that hired him only because of his stepdad's connections, and it's a fairly decent position, so I can only assume that he has a mid-range salary too. Living off of that for a young woman and a baby is completely doable if they try to live reasonably and take a step down from the lifestyle they're used to. If they're not willing to do that, too bad, but they're adults now and shouldn't be expecting everyone else to babysit them all the time. I can't speak for his girlfriend, but my son should at least have some brains, step up, and accept the responsibilities he has now, instead of looking for a convenient way out without having to make any compromises. Especially after the way that he treated his own father in the past, expecting any help from me at all is pretty ridiculous. After I made it clear to them that I would not be helping them, I went home, and one day ago, my ex-wife called me to berate me for not helping our son out. She slammed me for turning him away and told me that she'd made the right call all those years ago by cutting me off because apparently I really was a failure of a father. Not only that, but she also accused me of letting some success get to my head, referring to my business, and said that this would come back to me someday and I would regret not helping out my son when I had the chance to. I've been thinking about that and I don't know what to believe. Am I the a-hole for refusing to help my son out by letting him move in with his girlfriend and newborn because 7 years ago, he'd picked his mother and her partner over me in our legal battle for his custody? So, I decided to not help them after all. I spoke to a couple of my friends really openly about everything, which I'd never really done before because I didn't want it to seem like I was whining, but I couldn't keep this in anymore. I talked to them about everything and was completely honest and transparent with them. They were shocked to realize what had really gone down during the divorce because they'd always assumed that the divorce had been bad since my ex-wife had cheated, but they'd never thought that she turned my son against me and had just assumed that the whole thing about me being an absent father was true. It didn't surprise me, and I don't blame them because when we were in college, I did have a reputation of overworking myself, and they must have assumed that it had continued into my working life, but I'd always made time for my family. A family that clearly didn't need me. Anyway, after I told them everything, they agreed that I'd made the right call here. My son is a grown man now and could very well do the right thing, work hard at his job, and live frugally until they're able to support themselves better. He even has a better salary than most people his age with minimal experience, all thanks to his stepdad who arranged that position for him through his connections. But instead of making the best of his circumstances, he's cribbling about it and choosing to make life tougher for everyone around him instead. I'm not gonna take my ex-wife's words to heart because what does she know about ethics anyway? It's very funny when the least moral person you know tries to give you a sermon on what you should and should not do when it comes to your son and stuff. She did try to text me and guilt trip me some more, but I nipped it in the bud and blocked her. My son hasn't tried to get back in touch with me just yet, but it's been just a week since we last met, so he's probably going to let some time pass before he tries again, or maybe he's given up on me, which I really hope he has, because he shouldn't hold out any hope at all to try and get me to support him. His mother might encourage this bullcrap, but I am certainly not going to stand for it. 10 days have passed since the last time I met my son and his girlfriend in person, and today, his girlfriend texted me and asked me to meet them once more. I told her very politely that I wasn't interested in arguing with them and that they really couldn't change my mind, but she insisted that I must come to meet with them. They keep saying that if not for my son's sake, then at least for my grandson's sake, I should pay them a visit. They're living in a motel right now because they couldn't afford the rent of the apartment my son used to live in anymore. To be fair, it was a pretty massive apartment in a great location. I know because they told me that they had to vacate it since they'd already been ignoring the eviction notice for weeks now. I couldn't understand why it was such a big deal and why they just couldn't move into a smaller, less expensive apartment, but that's just how spoiled these kids are, I suppose. I told my son's girlfriend that I was gonna block her and that be it for my son's sake or grandson's sake, I wasn't going to support them the way his stepdad had been doing so far. I was not that guy, and I wasn't willing to become that guy either, so they could save their breath and leave me alone. Having said that, I blocked her and hoped that this would be the end of it because it really didn't feel good to be rejecting a literal baby. It was very manipulative of them to be using their child as a way to make me feel guilty about not visiting and not giving them a chance to make things right, but it is what it is. They have the means to make things work, but they're choosing not to, and I'm really not the bad guy for refusing to fall for their emotional manipulation. Hey everyone, I've been reading the comments on my original post, plus the updates, and I'd like to just thank all of you for being so kind to me. It means the world to me, really. So anyway, I've been staying away from my son, his girlfriend, and my ex-wife, but unfortunately, they keep trying to get to me one way or another. Today, my ex-wife showed up at my house with my son, his girlfriend, and their baby. I could tell that the kids were really uncomfortable, but my ex-wife was least bothered about them. I didn't want to let her in when I opened the door, but she literally pushed past me physically and barged into the living room. I had half a mind to call the cops right then to have her escorted off my property, but unfortunately, I had left my phone in the bedroom. Before I could say anything to her, she started yelling at me about what a crappy father figure I'd been and said that I was being selfish and heartless. Apparently, she believed that I was taking revenge on my son because of her affair from all those years ago, which simply wasn't true. I wasn't taking revenge. I just didn't think I needed to help him when he was perfectly capable of helping himself. I don't agree with his stepdad on a lot of things, the biggest being him sleeping with other people's wives behind their back while pretending to be their friend, but I can agree with him on this one thing. There was no need for them to be asking for help when my son had a job, his girlfriend could get a job, and my ex-wife could help out with watching the baby if she was so interested in being helpful to them. But they were choosing to pretend to be helpless and lost, and because I was not falling for their act, I was suddenly the bad guy. I was not gonna entertain their sad little act anyway, and it had nothing to do with my ex-wife and her infidelity in the past. She as a whole had nothing to do with my reaction to my son's demand for help. She's been out of the picture for a long time, and so it's ridiculous for her to even try and make this all about herself now. I fought with her for a few minutes, but then I had enough, so I told her to leave or that I would call the police and have her escorted out, and she decided that it would be a good idea to slap me for some reason. The slap itself didn't hurt much, but her wedding ring left an imprint on my cheek and that stung. The next thing I knew, I'd stormed out of the living room and into my bedroom where I locked myself in and called the cops, while my ex-wife yelled at me from outside the room and the kids tried to calm her down. As soon as the cops arrived, I told them everything that had happened, and yes, I did press charges against my ex-wife. This really was the cherry on top, because like I'd said initially, it truly felt like justice had been served, and now it had happened in the literal sense. She'd been taken away by the police, but I'm guessing she's out on bail by now. My son and his girlfriend left the premises after a lot of apologizing because they didn't want any trouble, and I let them go, but I don't think they'll be back to bother me anytime soon. As for my ex-wife, now I have the perfect excuse to get a restraining order against her, and she'll have to maintain her distance from me. So much for a power move. I just heard from a friend of mine that my ex-wife is getting divorced. I don't know for sure if it's true or not, and it's all just rumors right now, but if it's true, I'll definitely be popping champagne the day it's confirmed. I've already filed for a restraining order against her, and I'm going to make sure that I get the one that lasts for 5 years, because I don't want to take any risk with her. And now with the divorce, she's probably gonna be even more cuckoo. On the day she slapped me, I didn't realize exactly how crazy that was until I posted it here, and people commented on how that situation could have gone south very easily and that I was lucky to have avoided it. And I really agree with that, because I truly did get lucky. If she'd been in worse mood, or maybe if the kids hadn't been present there to stop her from snapping, then I might not even be typing this right now. It's the worst case scenario, but it very easily could have come true, and I'm grateful that I managed to escape that situation without going through much. Speaking of the kids, my son hasn't gotten back in touch with me yet, and neither has his girlfriend, so I'm assuming that they've given up now. Good for them, honestly. It's true, you guys. My ex-wife is getting divorced, but it's actually her husband who filed for it, because apparently he heard of her little run-in with the law at my place, and even though he did bail her out, he decided to end their marriage because of her erratic behavior. They'd been fighting for a while because he had cut his niece and our son off and wasn't supporting them financially anymore, which is again, not as much of a big deal as my ex-wife thought it was, but nevertheless, she'd been harping on and on about it. So that fight had just gotten worse with time, and I guess her coming to my house and slapping me, then getting arrested, was pretty much just the last straw for the guy, so now they're getting divorced. It took 10 years, but boy, do I feel vindicated right now. My son is doing alright though. He apologized to me for his behavior and told me that he and his girlfriend had decided to rent a smaller apartment. He didn't expect any financial help from me, but just genuinely wanted to connect and seek forgiveness because he thought that this was his own bad karma coming back at him. I don't know if that's true or not, or if he's just bluffing yet, but I guess I'll give it a shot. I haven't decided yet what I'm gonna do about that for sure, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to forgive him someday soon and bury the hatchet once and for all. This weird father-son enmity is getting old, and I'm too tired to keep picking fights with people from the past. Alright guys, that was it for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Please go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again guys. We will be seeing you in the next one.